As you can see, we have a guest today, and we are so excited. We brought you an expert in decluttering, Tyler Moore, aka Tidy Dad. If you watch him on Instagram, you know who I'm talking about. If you haven't, he has 373,000 followers. And I'm one of them. And I think I hooked the other two girls up also to that. He is a busy school teacher of seventh grade. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. He has beautiful three daughters, a beautiful wife. They live in New York City. He has been featured on Good Morning America. He also has been in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and he just recently, you were in Better Homes and Gardens Organized
Yes. Secrets of getting
magazine.
organized. Yes.
Yes. Well, welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to be with us.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me. And I feel like I started my life surrounded by women. I'm a middle child. I have two sisters, one older, one younger. As you said, I'm a school teacher by day, and then I'm also surrounded by women at home between my three daughters and my wife. So I'm always in, it's good company to be in, but I'm also excited to share the male perspective too on this topic because I do feel like both men and women we're at sort of this like cultural point where people are trying to declutter not just physical spaces but also their mental health and their professional lives. And so I feel like it'll just be great to have a conversation today.
Yeah, so that leads right into our first. Why don't you tell us a little bit how you became the tidy dad?
Yeah, so I started Tidy Dad alongside my wife when our second daughter was about one. So we had two daughters at the time. I was working as a school administrator. I made, for a variety of reasons, the decision to step down from my work as a school administrator. I really wanted to have more time home with my girls. And as often happens when you've had that first child and then you have that second child, there's this feeling that all of the systems that you had sort of used to maintain tidiness sort of started to implode. You know, as a teacher, and my wife is an occupational therapist, we had been around kids our whole professional career. And we had a bit of that air of like, we're going to know exactly what to do. We're going to know exactly what systems to put into place. But then there's nothing like that second child and sleep deprivation that kicks in, plus sort of the overwhelming sort of sense of all of the stuff that comes into your home.
Mhm.
We were sort of at a loss of what do we do in order to maintain this physical tidiness in our home? What do we do about all of the other aspects of life? And so one day, my wife and her sister, they went out with our two young daughters over breakfast. I had said, you know what? I think that we should switch bedrooms with the girls. Like, if we're going to make this 750 square foot apartment in New York City work, I think we should give them the larger bedroom. Let's take the smaller bedroom. My wife said, I think it's a good idea, but why don't you wait? Like, we don't have to do this today. Well, she left. And I thought, today's the great day to do this. So in the process, I basically imploded our apartment. And then she came back. She was like, she was very patient with me, but she was like, could you not have just waited for me? And so then it really did take several months of us sort of like sorting, processing. We use Marie Kondo's book, Spark Joy, and also The Magical Art of Tidying Up, sort of as a blueprint. But then where Tidy Dad came from was there were a lot of families in our neighborhood that it was at the time when Marie Kondo's show came out on
Mhm.
Netflix, and many people were saying, she seems to have a lot of great ideas, but I don't know how this is practical for families. And it's interesting because she's in the news again now that she's had her third child, and there's been a lot in the news about her own sort of physical tidiness and her philosophy. But Tidy Dad was birthed because I just started sharing what we were, the strategies that we were using in our apartment. And the very first post was me opening up my closet, which is 14 inches wide by 6.5 feet tall. But since then, it's really been documenting my like fatherhood journey and also our journey of continuing to make our space work for our family. Because when you have young children, and since Matilda's my middle, we added our third, Margaret.
Mhm.
She's about to turn 3. And so as the girls have gotten older, as we've increased in numbers, our square footage has remained the same. And
Right.
so we've had to really think about how do we maximize the space that we have? How do we build out systems? But Tidy Dad is really, the goal of it is to share with others how we're making our space work, some of the decisions that we've made in order to tidy up not only our physical space, but also other aspects of our life as well.
Yeah, you have a unique, I watch you every morning. You have your morning routines, which is today was bathroom cleaning. It's
Yeah,
Monday. You
yeah,
know, you've broken down, I'm going to say you've broken down your daily activities down into that minute of a breakdown
yeah,
actually on that. Talk a little bit, how did you come up with this process that worked best for you?
yeah. So I used to clean and look forward to sort of that cathartic, therapeutic Saturday morning clean. And so even from the time that my wife and I were first married, I feel like that morning, like 3 hours where I would clean from room to room, our apartment, it just felt very cathartic after a busy week at school because I found the task of cleaning, it was physical. I liked moving my body. I liked moving throughout the house. It gave me a sense of control because I was able to work through some of the frustrations of school by like scrubbing certain areas of our house. But I also liked that there was a very clear sense of completion at the end of that cleaning cycle. But as I like to joke, when you have young children, the thought of being able to do any focused tasks for 2 to 3 hours at a time is just really laughable. Whether it's cleaning or whether it's having some sort of hobby, like it just isn't realistic. And so my wife and I, we like to sit down every so often and sort of just do an assessment of household tasks, sort of deciding who's doing what. Does it feel, it's not that it's always 50-50, does it just feel balanced? Does it feel like it's working for us? And several years ago, I thought, what about if I just started doing one area of the apartment each weekday? And I was willing to wake up a little bit earlier because as a teacher, I also desperately need that morning quiet time because it also connected with me that if I wake up when my children wake up, I'm then with children every moment of the day until they actually go to sleep at night. And so the thought of waking up and being with children until the very end of the day also felt overwhelming. So I thought, let me just give this a try. Let me see if I can, develop sort of the system and routine. And it's funny because now, even on summer break, I still am sort of programmed to wake
Mhm.
up in that same way. And I do feel like, especially on Instagram, it started with people wanting me to teach them how to clean. And so they wanted me to break down all of the tasks, exactly what I was doing. And then people became more interested in that idea of why are you sacrificing sleep in order to get up and clean? And I'm like, no, I've just shifted my sleep cycle. But they
Mhm.
were more so interested in what am I thinking about? What am I processing? In order to then be best set up to be a husband and to be a dad and to be a teacher for that day. And so now I feel like it's a routine that's become very life-giving, not just for me, but for my family. And I also feel like on Instagram, it still is, it's very shocking to some people. The thought that I would wake up in the dark, before my children. But for this season of life, I feel like it's something that's so needed. But
Yeah.
as we all know, different seasons of life place different demands on you. So will I clean in the early mornings forever? I don't know. But for this season of life, it's been very helpful.
That's very interesting you say that. I'm doing a role reversal for a moment. I will be leaving the state where the home I reside now with my partner Peter, and we're going to be moving to Florida. But where we're moving to is completely furnished. So I have to get rid of everything, Tyler. So I'm the complete like I'm not decluttering, I'm
Yeah.
decluttering, and it's overwhelming
Yeah.
because as I'm doing this process, I was telling the girls beforehand, as I'm doing this process, I now have, well, this box is going here and this box is going here. And I can't move that yet because those are going to my children that live on the East Coast. And this is here. So, what advice do you have for people that are starting to do the decluttering and it's just so overwhelming?
Yeah, I think an orientation, there's an orientation shift that I think is helpful, which is the process of really thinking about how you're choosing what to keep as opposed to what to get rid of. And I feel like that orientation is very helpful because it puts more of a positive spin on the process of selecting items. And I feel like in your case, like I'm sure that there's a lot of excitement in many
Mhm.
ways about this idea of like downsizing, or this excitement around you really get to choose what are those items that actually bring joy that you get to take into your future. And I feel like instead of the process of like, looking at a box and saying, what do I need to get rid of out of here? It's almost like you have the box that's full of things, but then you have the box that's empty next to it. And it's that idea of sorting, like, which of these items am I choosing to take into my future? Because I feel like that orientation is incredibly helpful, because I think we all have a history of baggage when it comes to physical possessions. Whether it's things that have been handed down to us, or
Mhm.
whether we've gone through seasons of our life where we have overspent or where we've overconsumed in certain areas, and so you feel guilt or shame. There is the feeling sometimes that you've held on to things for so long, like why would you get rid of it now? And there's almost that guilt over the amount of time that you've held on to something. um, there's the guilt around gifts that people give you that maybe you didn't really like that gift, but you feel bad like getting rid of it or passing it on. And so I feel like it's when we read Marie Kondo's book Spark Joy, and also The Magical Art of Tidying Up, one thing that really struck me, because as a kid, um, and even now, I'm a very sentimental person. And I remember when I moved out of my parents' house to get married, I had boxes and boxes of like every single birthday card that I had ever gotten from the time that I was a kid. And I found in there a check that one of my grandmas had written to me for like my eighth birthday. And
Oh
we're
my
talking
goodness.
about like nearly 20 years had passed. And I thought that that was a clue to me that like I had held on to. I didn't want to deal with what was actually in that card. I just held on to it and I put it away because I was just in such a habit of, with paper, not being able to determine what was important to keep versus what was okay to sort of get rid of. And I remembered feeling some guilt because I was like, my grandma wrote me that check. I can't go to the bank now and cash it. And it was a very small example of how sometimes we can hold on to things and we aren't actually honoring the value behind it. And even when I think about cards, I have a special notebook where I have held on to cards, and I've held on to handwritten sort of sections of cards that like my grandparents wrote me or that my parents wrote me. Those have such greater value than some of the like random, I hate to say it, but like Christmas cards that you get throughout the
Right.
year.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that I don't have the practice of like thanking the person for sending it or honoring why they sent it to me. And that's Marie Kondo's philosophy, that idea of you are able to look at an object, you're able to hold it, you're able to appreciate the person who sent it to you and the meaning behind it, but then you're also able to let it go. Because even to this day, I don't send cards to people with the thought that they need to hold on to it for the
No.
next 50 years of their life. I sent them the card to let them know that in that moment in which I was writing it, I was thinking of them. And so after they've read it, it has fulfilled the purpose and it can move on. And so I do feel like it's just a very helpful orientation when you're going through things, that idea of choosing what to keep, but then really honoring why that item was brought into your life in that season, but then also thinking about, do I really need to take this into my future?
I absolutely love this whole connection with guilt. I never ever looked at it that way. And you've cleared up years of stuff for me just in that moment, because I'm like, okay, I get it now. And we grew up in a time when you were to hold on to something just in case. So, wow, I feel so free now.
And it's interesting because even bringing up that point, something that I've also learned is that say you do get rid of something, like we've all had those things that we're like in this sort of like decluttering spree, and we're like, okay, I'm going to get rid of that. I don't really need it. But then somewhere in the future, you may say, oh, I really wish I had that thing. The helpful orientation is that you actually now know what you really want out of that object or out of that item. And then when you go and get it, oftentimes you're then looking for a better quality item than the one you got rid of. And also, I feel like that guilt, I've had to think of it too in terms of sentimental things. And it's again going back to paper, but I do feel like paper is very consuming for people. And we were going through artwork with our girls, and we have files for them that are in their wardrobes, and it's broken down by age. So they have like when they were babies to like preschool, nursery school, preschool, and then every grade moving on up. And my oldest is in second grade. But I remember, sorting papers with the girls, and they had the like get rid of pile, send this to grandparents. I want to keep this. And I found myself saying, but like, don't you want to keep this, or don't you want to do like, and they were very much like, no, Dad, like we just enjoy making art. And that was that lifted so much guilt, because I realized that I was putting guilt onto them because I was having feelings about their artwork, but yet they had different feelings about their artwork. And I do feel like as parents, I think we can all think back on our, either childhood or when you were like first getting married, or like even grandparents. There are so many things that people feel a lot of love about giving to you, but also sometimes there can be guilt that's sort of associated with taking something. And so I do feel like, I don't know, I've also really had to work through unpacking that guilt, because even in our apartments, like we don't have space to store a lot of things. And so like my grandma, for example, she's a prolific antiquer. I don't know the best way to say it. She loves antiquing. She loves going and looking for dishes and plates and lamps. And, my sisters and like my dad, they have a lot of things that they've been given by her, but I have one very special lamp. And every time I go to my grandma's, she's like, would you like to take something back to New York with you? And I have to say, Grandma, I would, but I'm like, I have the lamp that I remember you dickering with the person trying to get 10% off of, and you almost got a fight you almost got into a disagreement with them over it. And every time I look at that one lamp, I just smile, and I'm immediately taken back to that moment when we were antiquing together. And it's just an example of how you can have one object that represents so many things. And like, I don't need dozens and dozens of things from my grandma. I have that one lamp that really does count for many. And so me just being able to set that boundary has helped with those feelings of guilt that I used to have by taking the item. And my grandma wasn't upset with me. She was like, okay, Tyler, like, I'm so glad you have the lamp. And I'm so glad that it brings up those memories, even if it is of me like dickering and fighting with the person. But it's it's just, I feel like it relates to what you're talking about with guilt.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question about the overwhelm, not so much of sentimental pieces, but things, and this, I'm talking specifically about me. I have like mountains of paperwork, and I try to work through this philosophy of, if I pick up a piece of paper, I have to decide what it is I'm going to do with this piece of paper. I'm either going to file it, keep it, get rid of it, whatever. That in itself can feel so overwhelming. I don't ever pick up the paper.
Yeah. And I feel like one of the things that can be very limiting for people is that when you approach it from that one piece of paper at a time, there's no way for you in that moment to actually determine and like decipher its level of importance. And so one of the things that we found when we were tidying was that we had to bring all of one category of items to the same room together, then we actually had to start sorting. And so when we did paper, because my wife, she worked as an occupational therapist and she had to hold on to files for like 7 years. I also had school papers. At the time, we had our girls' papers from when they were little. But I remember, sort of pulling out a file and looking in a box, and there was no way to sort through that box and see what was of importance or not, and we found old manuals like to the oven, and it was like this was like 2 apartments ago. And I feel like not until we brought everything out of that individual category together and then started sorting before making any sort of decision about what we kept or what left, that's what really has helped to be transformational. And it's a practice that we continue to this day with other categories of items. It's that idea of it's very difficult to determine what to keep or what is important unless you have everything sort of centralized and sitting in front of you, because your mind automatically goes to, well, I think I have something over there, or this might work in that file. So I do feel like with paper that can be so overwhelming to people, it is that idea of bringing it all together, then sorting into the individual categories, and then determine what are you going to keep and what goes. And honestly, it's like a lot of paper can go. I mean, we're also in this new like digital age where so much, even like the process of paying our taxes now, like it's not as exciting because the accountant is virtual, so it's like, not that you love going to the accountant, but like there's so much that now, like I don't even get the W-2 in the mail because it's just, I download it, I upload it to the portal and it's off. And so we've now had to think about what are the digital ways that we're like storing things. And that can be its own sort of source of clutter, just not in the physical sense. But I do feel like that exercise of bringing it all together, then categorizing it, then choosing what to keep versus what to move out can be a really helpful process.
Definitely try that, because it does get crippling at times, no question. And I think like when talking to other people about decluttering or getting rid of things, it is that process when they lift something up and they're looking at it, there's either that sentimental attachment or what if I could use this later. Certainly, that was my dad's sentiment, was always save it because you might need it like sometime down the road. Like my dad had a garage full of all of these jars of stuff just in case we might need something.
Yeah. And it was interesting because another book that I read was The Swedish Art of Death Cleaning. And it was a really interesting book because it was written by a woman who basically, she had to go in after her parents and she had to clean and sort through all of the items within their home. But she also talked about her grandma, this started between 5 and 7 years before her grandma's death. She noticed that her grandma started the process of slowly giving away each of her items, and it started of like, her friend came over, they enjoyed drinking tea together. And she was like, you know what, why don't you take this teacup home with you? Like, this has always been one of my favorite sort of cups. Like, why don't you take this on? And so as she was sorting through her parents' things, it's this parallel journey of her thinking back on the life of her grandma. And it's that idea of what she came to realize was that in death, your physical objects, you don't want that to become a burden to others. And so it essentially changed her orientation on stuff. And it reminded me a little bit of my grandma who's still living, but she has started, to give of some of her things, and she, will go over to her house and she's like, why don't you walk through? And if there's something that you would like to take home, you can take it, which is like why I chose the lamp, that I did. But I do feel like there are things that are passed down generationally. And we, for better or worse, we do have different outlooks on life than our parents or our grandparents. But I'm even finding it, my family, they all live in homes, that are 2,000 plus square feet or larger. And my family of 5 is in 750 square feet. So our orientation around what do we keep? what do we move out? My sister, she's in like a 5,000 square foot farmhouse and she has all of these farm animals. And so it's funny, my parents joke that they're like, we have the one son in New York City with his 3 kids. We have the other one who has a farm. And then my older sister is still single and very happy. And she has her 2 cats. And she's like, I watch your all's lives. And she's like, I am happy to just go home and just be, she's like, I am happily alone. But it's just interesting. We have to push back sometimes on some of those, strongly held opinions around stuff and space that have been passed down to us. And that goes back to some of the conversations around guilt. And we really have to figure out, how do we carve out a path forward on our own? Because no one else lives in our space and deals with our stuff. And so I think having that own, I talk about it a lot, this idea of like just enough, each person being able to name for themselves, like what is just enough in an individual category. I think that's why that philosophy is so important.
Yes, I love I had a grandmother who saved everything. She moved down to Florida, and when she left her apartment, it was like she still lived there. And I found bandages from 1940, like right.
My wife's mom, my my daughter, my in-laws, they're in an RV, and my daughter scuffed her knee, and my mother-in-law pulled out the Band-Aid set from my wife when she was born, and she tried to give my daughter the Band-Aid, and it like didn't even stick to her leg. And we were like, what have you seriously held on to these Band-Aids for over 35 years? So
but because you can, but I think again, she grew up during the Depression.
Yeah.
So the thought of throwing something out was like taboo. But it was like 2 years later, she called me one day and she said, I need my measuring spoons. And I'm like, and what measuring spoons are those? The ones you took out of my apartment. And I'm like, I don't have those any longer. Well, the world ended because I was wasteful.
Yeah.
And I gave them away. And so it's that whole thought process, but you've brought so much like forward, like even for me, I wrote down choosing what's going into my future. Like I wrote that down. But what I'm finding throughout this decluttering that I'm going through, and I want to know if you can speak a little bit to this, is as I was decluttering, I'm finding my mind is becoming calmer instead of like, well, I find when I have so much going on in my mind and I'm overwhelmed, that means I'm too decluttered around me. Do you?
Yeah, I think that there's such a connection between mental clutter and physical clutter. And that idea is that sometimes our home can feel like a manifestation of what's going on in our mind. And we've been through seasons. And even if you think on a micro level of like, when you come home from a trip, like often what happens is that suitcase, you had to get it all nice and tidy and compact so that you could get on the airplane or you could fit it in your trunk. And then sometimes when you come home, it's like you open it up and everything just explodes. And then after a week, you're like, I actually need to deal with this laundry, and why it goes back to the story or to the vacation is like, there's so many things that you've sort of like navigated and decisions that you've made. And then sometimes when you come back home, you feel that feeling of like, oh, I'm home, and sort of life happens again. But in terms of a mental and physical, I mean, what I found is that the individual categories that I have simplified and I've made it where I have fewer decisions, it's actually been so life-giving. And an example is my wardrobe. So I mentioned that it's 14 inches wide, 14 and a half inches wide, 6.5 feet tall. But I have a capsule wardrobe that's built around some core colors. So I'm wearing one of my signature colors today. My colors, they're navy, tan, and olive. And then I sometimes throw in burgundy. So in the mornings, I'm cleaning always in my pajamas, which always get people talking, but I can't clean in my work clothes. Plus my girls will get me dirty like before I have to leave to go to work. So I typically have like 2 minutes to get ready. But in terms of a decision-making standpoint, everything in my closet mixes and matches because it is that capsule wardrobe. So from a decision-making standpoint, it is so easy for me to grab a dress shirt, a sweater, a pair of slacks, get dressed, and then just move on. And so I feel like that is just a tangible way that I have reduced the amount of decisions that I have to make, which then in fact helps some of that mental clutter that I can feel, because what I'm going through is I've got to get the girls out. Are their snacks ready? Are their backpacks ready? I actually have to get them to school because it's a 2 mile we walk, each way. I'm then doing a run through of, okay, what are all of the things that I have to do at school that day? Is everything prepped and ready to go? My clothes should be the last thing that I think about. But for many people, clothes can feel incredibly overwhelming. Like that's a category of items that people just have, so much decision fatigue around because there are so many options. And so I do feel like if you can identify for yourself, what are some of those categories of items that you feel like you could simplify, that then gives a bit more space for the other things in your life that are actually important. And so for us, going back to travel, whenever we travel, we just went to Paris and London with our girls. We took carry-on backpacks. Everybody has a capsule wardrobe for their travel. We use packing cubes. We have a very limited number of things that we bring, but we do laundry while we're on our trip. Then we do laundry when we get back. But I feel like the lighter you pack, the easier it is when you get home. But that's another way that we've just simplified in certain categories, because like going to London and Paris with 3 kids, 7 and under, there's a lot of it's like mental Olympics the whole time that you're there. So we needed something that felt a bit simpler.
So did you choose not to bring any souvenirs home then?
So we had professional photos made when we were there. That was a lovely souvenir.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think that one girl, it's funny, they each chose ink pens, and one girl, she chose a pencil. Those were our souvenirs. But what we've talked about with the girls, like we didn't have room to bring them.
Right.
But we talked with our girls beforehand, this idea of experiences over things. And I bring up the example of the professional photos, and I posted them on Instagram, and there were so many people that were like, I hadn't thought about doing this. And I was like, well, we're a family of 5. My mom is also traveling with us. It's really difficult to get photos of the 6 of us. I also wanted to capture this like specific moment. So we had an early morning photo shoot on the steps of the Louvre. And that is the souvenir that I need. I don't need stuff that is just going to sit around. And so I do feel like, it was interesting what we're talking about of sort of this older generation mindset around how you don't get rid of stuff. I feel like this newer mindset that I'm taking into my future, and hopefully with my own children, is this greater emphasis on being very deliberate about the things that I do bring in. That it's almost the opposite. It's not holding on to and hoarding, but it's being really intentional about each item that does come into our home. Because what I don't want is this feeling that we've like outgrown our space, and people are like hermit crabs. So hermit crabs, they get larger and larger until they fit their shell, and then they leave the shell, and then they go find a larger shell that they have space, and then they grow larger, and then they have to get rid of that shell. And I feel like our culture, and I grew up in it too. I grew up in the suburbs of Louisville, Kentucky. The way that you showed stature and that you were advancing in your career or in your family was that you had to get the larger home. Yeah. And even this idea of starter homes, like starter home is such a prevailing sort of term that people use. And it's funny because my dad, he used it for my sister, because he was like, yeah, she's buying that 2,000 square foot house. It'll be a good starter home for them for a few years. And I'm like, Dad, that house is like 2.5 times the size of my apartment. And you're not calling my apartment a starter home. But yet in certain areas of our country, like there is that idea that you first get married, and you then have that starter home, and then you show advancement by getting the larger home, until then your children leave and you're an empty nester. And then you sit with rooms full of stuff
Yeah.
that you then have to sort of sort through and deal with, or you hold on to it for your children, but then your children really prefer IKEA furniture as opposed to the like hand-me-downs from 3 generations. And then again, you're like, why did I hold on to this table for the past 40 years that no one is even going to appreciate or use? So it becomes this like
Yes.
cycle. And so it's really, it's sort of like breaking that cycle and renaming it anew for yourself. But it's fascinating to talk about.
What would you say is the three or the most the biggest question you get asked, like over and over again? What is it that you get asked?
Over and over, it's where we're going to live when the girls are teenagers.
That's
So
interesting.
People are fascinated by us living in this apartment. The girls share the largest bedroom. We had to bring in 3 wardrobes, which are behind me, because our building was built in 1914. There aren't closets, but we needed like closets. So we brought in the 3 wardrobes. They share a triple bunk. And they want to know what's going to happen when they get older, and they bring up questions around privacy and sharing space, and them needing their own rooms. But it's fascinating because on the other side of the conversation that question is the people who say, we used to live in a much smaller space, or we used to live in the city. And then when our kids got older, we moved to the suburbs. And they said, we miss that smaller space. Life felt simpler. I felt like we spent more time together. Now everybody seems to be spread across, these thousands of square feet. And so what I say to people is, I don't know where we're going to live. I mean, we moved to New York City when we were first married. We thought that we were going to live here for 2 years. It's now been 12. People also said, well, when you have children, like you're going to have to move. And I reminded them that over 1 million children are in the New York City public school system. So clearly there are people here with kids, but I do feel like, I don't know, we're just living in this season. And there's that delicate balance between planning for the future while also being in the present. And so, I do feel like that relates to finances or how we spend our time or what we choose to be involved in. But I feel like we're in this very, very short window of life where we do have these little kids at home. I know that someday they're going to get older. There may be a need for more space, but at the same time, what our apartment gives us, which is the ability for me to walk to and from school, while also it forces us to get out and explore. We also we have a cottage in Pennsylvania that we bought when our youngest daughter it was the fall before she was going to be born. And really we bought our cottage, one, because prices in New York City are astronomical for an apartment, and financially it just didn't make sense. So we bought a little cottage in Pennsylvania thinking this will be a nice retreat space for grandparents to be able to come, because we were aware of, as our parents get older, just as space, like it's become much harder to host grandparents in our apartment, but yet they can come to the cottage. We can have our outdoors. That's where we are in the summertime. And so I feel like more so, instead of saying we need to get that suburban home where I would have to commute in every day, we thought, what if we more so think radically about our resources? And could we have this apartment in the city that's rent stabilized, that's below our means, and also have this small cottage? It's 1,100 square foot. The realtor, when we pulled into the driveway, he was like, you're not going to want this house. It's too small. He was like, I can show you lots of other houses that are much larger. And we were like, no, actually, this is 400 square feet more than our apartment. Plus it has a washer and dryer and a dishwasher and separate bedrooms that you don't have to, like, we have to walk from one room to the other. We have to walk through each other's rooms to get anywhere. But then he was like, oh, you guys are smart. He was like, because the smaller the square footage, the smaller the lot, the lower property taxes you pay, the cheaper the maintenance is, the cheaper it is to heat and cool. And I was like, Yeah. And like this size is just enough for us. Like there's lakes, there's hiking trails. We are not people that just sit in our home. Like we
No.
go and do. And so I feel like when you can also match your space to what you really want from life, like that can be very freeing. Like I don't want to spend my entire Saturday mowing 5 acres of a yard. I don't want to have to clean a 3,500 square foot house. But for others, they don't mind that. And that's perfectly okay. And so I feel like with that question, it's hard not to take it personally because sometimes I feel like there can be some judgment. But also when I explain that idea of we're living in the present, we're planning for the future, we're open if the needs of our family change, but also this is why we are solidly in the space that we are right now. People are like, okay, I get that. Like, and I can also respect the decision that you've made.
Also, your kids are being brought up in that experience. So
Yes, they don't know
they're
any different.
exactly, their whole world is that 750
The funny,
square foot apartment, and
what was
it's
so-
fine for them, totally fine.
Yes, what's so funny is each girl it's happened when they've been between 2 and 3 is when they can actually sort of go to grandparents' house and they start to ask questions and they're like, why are there all these doors? Why are there all these bathrooms? Like, what are these rooms? And they're like, Daddy, Papa has a basement. Like, they're like, it's a whole house underneath his house. And the funniest is they're like, we don't have to worry about who's below us. They'll like go down into the basement and they're like, so who are the downstairs neighbors? Like, can we jump? And I'm like, yes, you can jump because in our apartment we can't, even though it's my wife's sister lives
Yeah.
downstairs, so we do have sort of a family compound. But it's funny, yes, they don't know any different. And when they go to grandparents' houses, there are extra bedrooms, but they all three sleep in the same bedroom. Like they don't know any different.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful experience to be able to have them grow up, because whatever decisions it is that they make when they are older and decide to do whatever it is that they're going to do, I think that you have brought to them something very, very special about what is truly important in the dynamic of family.
Yeah, and I feel like so often, and I've thought it too, it's like when people ask, what is your wish for your children? I feel like so often people say, well, I just want them to be happy. And I feel like, as we know, like happiness isn't really a goal in and of itself, because happiness, if you are trying to pursue happiness as a goal, you're basically going to fail, I don't know, 98% of the time. But I feel like more so what I want for them is choice. Like I want them to be able, I feel like the biggest gift that you can give your children is the ability to be able to make the choices in life that they want to, from the vocation that they pursue, the place where they decide to live. And we often joke because my wife and I, we've moved. New York City is the furthest extreme within the United States that you could live from where we grew up. And so we do the opposite. And we're like, what? We're like, what is the polar opposite of what our girls could decide? And I think the polar opposite would be the like McMansion in Texas, like on some huge sort of like ranch. So it will be very interesting to see what they decide to do. But I do feel like choice, and it's a gift that our parents gave us, but I do feel like, with small space, we're constantly confronted with this decision around choice and this decision around there are competing priorities. And it's really being, I don't know, just very clear about what our wants are and what our needs are, and also setting boundaries around our time and our space and our energy.
Yeah, it really sounds like it forces you to live with intention. Like you're just living with intention.
Yeah, because even going back to my closet, like, yeah, I could want to have a choice. My brother-in-law, he has, and this is very popular with certain people with huge closets. They have these denim bars. Have you heard of the denim bar, where essentially you have so many pairs of jeans that you can have this like whole bar, and you're able to arrange them in this like ombre sort of like color tone. So the idea of a denim bar is something that a lot of people want to pursue, but my dad helped my sister move from that starter home that I was talking about into her farm. And my dad was like, have you tallied up the number of pants that your husband has? And my sister was like, no. He was like, well, I just had to move him out of his closet because I was helping. And he has like 60 pairs of pants. And with 60 pairs of pants, that means you can wear one pair every day for 2 full months without ever doing laundry. And so I feel like with the intention, I can't have 60 pairs of pants, but I can have a good quality. I can have like 5 good quality pairs of pants.
Yes.
Because like as a teacher, a couple of years ago, I split 2 pairs of pants in one day. And if you split 2 pairs of pants in one day when you are teaching 7th grade, you from then on have really high quality pants that you put in your closet. So, I've learned a few things about intention. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Ladies, do you have any further questions? I don't want to keep Tyler too long.
Oh God, I could keep talking for hours.
I know.
This has been fabulous. Yes.
Yes.
So Tyler, we will put all of your contact information so people can start following you on Instagram. But I do, like, my morning's made. Like watching you in the morning. I'm in the Midwest, so I'm an hour behind you. So I'm just waking up and I'm like, you're like my role model in decluttering my home. And I'm actually going from 2,500 square feet to 1,400 square feet. So I'm going down there. I don't think we'll be in 750 though. Congratulations.
You never know. You never know.
But, and so I've written down actually some notes and I really appreciate that, on that. But what I'd love to say to the audience as you watch this, if you have any further questions, please make sure you put them down in the comment field and we'll make sure that we, if we get enough, we might have Tyler come back to do some of those questions and answers for us.
Yeah.
But again, thank you so much for joining us today, Tyler.
Yes,
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you as a regular member of our community.